Hi, my name is Patrick Jones. I'd like to welcome you to the first of 3 workshops on drawing and painting the fantasy female figure. Now, before I start any painting, I like to warm up, and I do that by drawing the figure. With this being a female figure, obviously that's what I'm going to draw. And when you're in the world of one thing, it becomes more and more fluid as you go. So for me to draw male figures before I do this female figure, it might be a little bit counterproductive. So I want to feel the flow and the energy of the female figure throughout and get into that world of flow, gesture. And on that point, I'm using the gestural hand here, which means picking the pencil up with an underhand grip like a monkey would, and resting my knuckles on the paper surface. This is newsprint for mileage, meaning I can draw lots and lots on it without worrying about expense. Newsprint is the most inexpensive paper on earth, and it has a lovely surface that can't be equaled, and therefore that's what I use. The only downfall of that is it's not archival, although with a lot of care these newsprint drawings can be archived for centuries. But in an ordinary sunny atmosphere they'll fade, turn golden and fall apart. But also there is another reason to use them, because you're not precious at all about your drawings, knowing that they will never last the test of time without care. It means that you don't have to worry too much about the drawing, and that gains us an incredible freedom. It takes away all fear. This isn't going to be a masterpiece, and it's not meant to be. These are little warm-up doodles for me to approach my oil painting with confidence and muscle memory that's being honed. What I mean by muscle memory is every time we make a mark, our arm remembers it as well as our mind does. And it's not a true memory. It's more of how a juggler works. They repeat and repeat, juggling balls, and watch them fall many times before they're juggling those balls without even thinking about it. And then they can add 5 more, and before you know it, it looks like magic. And that's how art can be too. We can grow this muscle memory with lots of drawings, like I'm doing here, little doodles, and hone that gestural hand and grip, and also enjoy it. You know, there's fun in not worrying about how things turn out. These drawings aren't for public view, even though that's what's happening here. But generally, that's what we're doing. We're drawing for ourselves. If you embrace that notion, then you become more fluid automatically. And that's a wonderful gift. And so here I am, going from side to side. And I'm not here to teach drawing, by the way. This is all about concept and painting. There are many movies on my web store that you can access and download every kind of drawing the figure movie that you would like, from the face, the head, breaking it all down into arms and legs. But what's the most important thing after all of that is the holistic nature of the figure. And that can be gained with all those methods. Working in parts, working and studying those parts, working on connecting the parts, and that's what I'm doing right now. I'm thinking holistically and moving down this body part by part, but being aware of where the feet would be before I get there. Now there's many ways to draw, and I'll usually draw one big huge shape and work into it. Here I'm working with a concept that's very freeing for me, and it's streams of consciousness. I'm starting the drawing wherever I like and letting the hand lead me to where I want to go next, but still aware of where I'm going. I won't just start at face and not know what's going to happen next, although that is an exciting prospect. So art is like nothing else. There are no real rules. We can break them as many times as we like and see what happens. So it's not a binary or objective thing. It's subjective. There are no rules. As Glenn Vilppu wisely says, there's only tools. And the tool I'm using here is a General's charcoal pencil. And I like to stay within a brand for tone. The tones of these pencils equal the willow charcoal that they also sell. So I like General's as a brand, and they're very easy to find. Now once again, here I am working on a head and moving down that head in a sequence of events that I've done many times. Halfway for the eyes, just to make it simple. Another halfway down from the eyebrows to the nose. Halfway down to the chin from the nose for the bottom of the bottom lip. Now those little echoes of previous training, previous mileage, meaning lots of drawings, lots of time drawing, all make this a fluid idea. Just as well as this forearm and the concept of going from side to side, back and forth, is something I embrace fully. I went from the lower part of that forearm to the upper part of that forearm. I want to be aware of one side to the other. What's on the other side of this rib cage is the breasts, but I'm aware of the scapula, the wing bone of our shoulder, before I get there, and back and forth all the way down. So like I say, this is not normally how I draw. It's how I love to draw freely after all of the instruction, after all of the mileage, and just wiggling around there. When you watch me draw the working sketch for the Queen of Mars, which is what I'm going to paint, then you'll see me working in a different method, which will be structure and gesture. And I'll find big structural elements that I'll build on through and over with gestural line. And what we're looking at here is really mostly gestural line. And the difference between those two things are that the gesture has flow and the structure has solidity. And you can see these drawings are actually quite wobbly, and therein lies their charm. But for me to work an oil painting out of those, although it would be very interesting as a fine art piece of art, when it comes to illustrative art, in telling a story through your art, and generally what an art director would want for a book jacket, for instance, then it's less of the fine art scene and more of the representational idea. And therefore, the figure will have to look less wobbly than this. It'll have to look solid. And so I'll work with structure. And the danger with structure is it becomes a stiff idea if we're wedded to it and worry about it too much. And there we are, the very reason why I'm doing this. The very reason I'm doing this is because when I get to structure, I want to make sure that I have a gestural hand in flow. And therefore I can work with the most difficult of all concepts, which is to draw structure with gestural style. Structure that seems to flow. Structure that has movement. If we think of a box doesn't have movement to it. The minute we squash it with our fist and see all those rippled lines, it'll look like it has some movement to it. We'll imagine the force that created that puncture wound, if you like. And so the gesture is like a river, and the structure, once again, is like a box, or it's like a building. It's a solid, on-moving thing. And we don't want that in a figure. We don't want the figure to look like a statue. It must look as if it's about to move. And all of these figures look like they have movement in them. And that is down to the gestural line. The flow coming from that hand to the pivot of the wrist to the swivel of the elbow all the way up to the rotation of the shoulder. That's what we get with the gestural hand. What's the difference between the gestural hand and a normal writing grip? The pencil is then on its point, and it rests across our hand and pops out the top. A writing grip, as we sign a signature. That is how most people draw, and yet it is, in my eyes, a very tight and a very constrictive way to hold a pencil. You can see me scooting across, skating across the surface here with that gestural grip, knowing that I have the full function from the fingertip and the pencil tip all the way up to the shoulder. Whereas in the writing grip, you're just working with your wrist. You'll know it when you try both. And the gestural grip will feel very, very awkward to begin with because we've spent our life drawing with the writing grip. But the writing grip, if you think hard about it, you're balancing a point on a tightrope edge, and that can only be a stiff idea because then we're only working with the wrist, only the wrist. The wrist is just rotating round and round. It gives us a very small range of motion. Whereas I could draw a giant circle with this gestural hand. Of course, I'll go into the detail grip when all the gesture's in there. We have to get in there sometime and draw a very fine detail, but I will hold that off until the very end. And look at the beauty now of these wonderful wobbly lines and the carelessness of it. And that doesn't mean I don't care about the art. I care deeply about the art. I mean, I don't care about getting precise lines because that can be stultifying. It'll stop us as artists exploring and navigating across the figure with confidence. You saw how confident those eyes, nose and mouth went in there. Very confident. If we blew that up to a huge size, you might go, well, the proportions aren't quite right. And now you're talking about structure and placement. And that's what we'll have to attend to in the end. But by doing lots of these little drawings, attending to that at the end is a very easy and simple thing to do. We can structurally put in lines from one eye to the other to line them up. And that's not a hard thing to do. Once again, I'm going to finish these little doodles with a small little drawing in the bottom here, if there's space. Put one in, and drawing different size figures as well will help you to not fall into a world where you only draw big or only draw small. And therefore I can draw a little figure like that sitting on a train with a sketchbook very easily. And I get closer to the end of the pencil too if I want more detail without having to go into the detail hand, the writing grip. And now I'm slowing down a little bit. I'm really enjoying this, and that brings up another one of my maxims, which is never draw faster than your thoughts. So if it looks like I'm drawing fast here, which I'm not at all, I'm actually drawing quite slowly here, then it's just a matter that I have drawn lots. I've got more mileage, and so making these line decisions is an easier thing for me to do because I've drawn the thigh many times, the rib cage many times in many different positions. And so these shapes are familiar to me, but they're never the same. They're always slightly different. And that's what brings the energy to drawing and what makes it so exciting for me. And especially the figure, because nothing moves like the human figure. Not an animal on earth has this kind of articulation. And so we get a different pose, a different line from every single change that the model brings to a pose, and then we have different shapes of models as well. So it's a world of incredible energy that never stops becoming more energetic as you learn more. Alright, so we've done our doodles, we've warmed up. I've got myself a piece of willow charcoal. You can see I've sharpened it into a little shape that I like. And it's a 2-finger wide grip for me. So my index finger and my middle finger and my thumb are holding this on the surface. And once again, my whole hand is on the surface here. And I'm thinking about this concept. What am I going to do? I know that I'm going to paint a fantasy female figure. That's the theme I give myself to start and light the spark for what comes next. What am I going to do with that concept? And it's actually a very broad concept, so I want to narrow it down a little bit. But to begin with, I want to have a world of possibilities. I want to have it open there and think to myself, what would I like to paint? You know, I've got this full freedom ahead of me. It's wonderful. And that can be restrictive to a young artist starting out because, you know, sometimes you need a boundary. In fact, often. So for me, I am thinking, I can go wild here. I fancy painting a warrior. I fancy painting a warrior fighting a snake. You know, that's what's in my mind here. And that'll give me the opportunity to draw a very gestural thing, which is a snake. and also have some tension in the piece. You know, what's more terrifying than a snake for most people? Not much. And so how much of a warrior would you be to tackle that snake in battle? So that's my first thought. Let's have that tension. Let's have that theme of, we can call it fear if you like, fear of the unknown. Are we going to survive this? And also that warrior aspect. She has probably fought many snakes. What demeanor will she have? Will she be proud and unafraid? Will she be fearful? This is the first snake she's ever encountered. Those things I can put into the emotion of the piece. And emotion is very important. If I don't have emotion, if I don't have an emotional idea in there, then the work's going to fail. So we need to have something. There's not many emotions, but there's a myriad of ideas that can come from those emotions. We can have fear, we can have happiness, we can have bliss, we can have any manner of emotion to drive the theme. So let's have a look at a warrior princess, for instance. She's out there fighting battles like the royals used to do in the olden days. They'd be at the head of the charge. The king would lead the fight, for instance. I'm drawing fantasy female figures here. So the queen is out here fighting for her life. Maybe the theme could be, and I like to keep it open as well, and let's call it story now. Let's say we're working a story into this, a backstory. The backstory is we have a princess. Maybe for a trial, she is sent out into the wilderness for a week to survive. And that's something that is done throughout the world, especially in the ancient world, to build a young person into an adult. So let's say it's that. She's a young princess. She's out there. She's encountered a snake. She only has a few things. And in this mythical world, the snakes are magical. They're huge. They think. They can speak, maybe, perhaps, you know. That fuels my imagination. What I'm thinking about here, because I know I'm going to finish a painting now, is that I'm thinking of the structural idea. What will this look like? What will the painting look like, and the figure in the painting, if it has some structural elements to it, rather than vagary, like the doodles we had there? So I'm thinking from this position, what would the tilt of the hips look like? I've put the tilts in. This is a contrapposto pose, which means counterbalanced. And so the shoulders are tipping toward the highest hip, and the highest hip is the straightest leg. And the bent hip then has the opposing side, the opposite, the counter. Counterpoise, counterbalance, contrapposto. So contra, different. So I'm feeling all these shapes, because I've painted many figures and drawn much, much more. And I'm aware of these shapes. I'm aware of the separation of the shapes from the rib cage to the hips. There are two big massive shapes of the torso. And I have shorthand ideas for the head, for instance. I know the eyes are halfway down and on, as we've discussed just a few minutes ago. And I love the curve of a forearm. And one of my mantras is, if you're going to draw a hand, make sure it's a gestural hand. Make sure that the arm leading up to that hand is gestural too. And it's a continuous, almost snake-like idea. And there's another idea. Echoes. You know, if I have that limb feel limber like a snake, and then put a snake in, it'll echo that shape. You can see it also in the leg there. The leg that's toward us, the leg that's slightly bent, has that beautiful serpentine feel to it, running down the back of the leg, all the way down to the calves to the foot. When we get to feet, they're not very gestural, they're quite blocky. So I put them as one straight line, just to feel them on the floor, so as not to break the gesture. So I want always that gesture to be king. And here we have that big snake twirling around her. She's already in trouble, she's entrapped by it. And it's looking at her in the eye. So we have that wonderful moment of tension that I began this idea with. Alright, so that's one idea. But I want many ideas. I know that from experience that there's always more to explore. Now, I haven't drawn in digital platforms for quite a while, so I'm going into Photoshop here and testing a little pencil out. I want to keep it as organic as possible and feeling the flow quite easily. So even though I haven't been in the digital platform for a long time, the fact that I'm drawing constantly means that there's really no damage done at all. The main thing that I'm missing now is a mechanical aspect that I've maybe forgotten what a multiply really truly does. A multiply layer, and my hand's not that attuned to the mechanics of the digital platform, but you can see that from working with pencil on paper, there's no real difference. The only difference, the major difference, is that I'm working with a detail hand. With some programs we can tilt, but it's never quite the same astonishing quality you get from a traditional pencil. Alright, so I'm going to lay in now my aspect box. 16:9 is what I usually teach my students when they're drawing for concepts. That's the YouTube ratio. So I'm working in cinematic idea ratios here. And that's the canvas size I'm going to use. So I'm going to use an 18:25 will work nice, and that'll get us closer to the cinema ratio. So the canvas will be less than that. It'll be less streamlined. And you can see I've added a little bottom to it, a little extra line to the bottom, because I'm used to working in 16:9 ratio when I'm teaching my animation students. So here I am wiggling around here, and I have now in my mind the idea of the Martian Queen. So I'm thinking about her lounging inside her palace on Mars, and the concept here for me, the backstory is this is Mars 1 million years before people evolved. And that gives me right away a huge scope for fantastic imaginative ideas, especially for backgrounds and for costume as well. So I'm not wedded to any costume from our past. I can run with whatever fanciful idea I have. And that's terrific, because I can get gestural with the costume and run it off the figure to echo the figure shape. Now, with that kind of freedom, it can be also, what can we do? We just reinvent the wheel and try and imagine what designers on Mars were like. Well, for me, the best thing to do is just to look for design on Earth and then just twist it and mash it up and see what it would look like if we went crazy with it. And that should give us a commonplace idea that any culture would have, which is basically fitting a costume onto a figure. We'll have to have some kind of rhythm that echoes the figure. Otherwise, the costume won't fit. And so, with that in mind, even on Mars 1 million years ago, of course the costumes are going to fit the figure the same. And they're going to design around that. Now I'm going with the idea that the Martians were humanoid, same as us, exactly no different. And let's assume that that DNA traveled to Earth in some way. Let's say that's how we are. So I'm not working with an alien creature here, and I'm not working with tendrils or anything like that. This is going to be a Martian human-style queen. What's going to make it magical and Martian is the atmosphere and the exoticness of the costumes. I could make her skin a different color, could make it bright pink if I wanted to, and that was the John Carter of Mars idea, and that was nice. So I've got a lot of influence from that, from the John Carter of Mars, Edgar Rice Burroughs books. But I want to do my own. There's only so many ideas. There's only one Mars. And if you put a queen on Mars, you're obviously going to be compared to the Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. But that doesn't mean that he owns copyright on one idea. It's just an idea that people lived on Mars. So he can't own that. We can all go and say, well, she's a queen of Venus if you want, and make it a different thing. But here we are on Mars. I like the idea of Mars. It's always been romantic to me. I've read lots of books on stories from Mars, especially the Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. It's one of my first commissions when I was a young artist, and I just loved it. It's made me a lifelong fantasist of a would-be Mars. If only if we reached there in a rocket ship and there were Martians there, it would have been just the most awesome thing. So here we are, we have the chance as fantasy artists to live our dreams out. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm living my dreams out on a 2D surface. And it may not seem like an epic dream, but it is. We still revere art from centuries ago, and that's what that is. It's just canvas with marks on it. And if you wanted to take it into a more abstract idea, we're just looking at dirty marks, strategically placed to trick the eye into believing we're seeing a figure. That's all really we're doing. And at the same time, even that's all we're doing, it's one of the most incredible things that we're doing that with the simplest of tools. And it is timeless. It is what I love about art. It will always be amazing. It'll always stun the audience when we do something nice and something imaginative, something that only we can do. Every person that makes these choices, even if they're the same technique, will make a slightly different choice, a slightly different line, a slightly different bias toward dark and light. And so there'll always be only me and only you will make the marks that only I can make and only you can make. They'll be different each time, even based on the same methods. So every artist is totally unique, is the bottom line of that. And that, once again, that's what makes art so wonderful to me, that every artist is unique. Now, I've placed on the side there a value chart, gotten the darkest darks to the lightest lights in a big brush in Photoshop here, and just run them down the side there. And that means I don't have to go to the color picker. I'll just go over with the eyedropper tool and just sample those darks and lights as I go to get this. So I'm working with a big blocky tool like I would with charcoal. And the reason for that is I don't want to be precise. If I'm precise, then I'll start finishing a figure. Here, all I want to do is find the basic broad values, which means dark to light, and the big basic broad shapes, to not make it so clear, even to myself, where I'm going, that I close the door on possibilities. Now, what I do want, and what I'm playing with here, and why this part actually takes so long, is I've already worked out from the sketch what I want, and I'm happy with that pose. And now I want to think, one of the hardest things is how to make it dimensional. And the dimension comes from these values. So we can echo 3 dimensions in our work with just line by showing perspective lines. But we really want to show atmospheric perspectives, and we do it with value tones, and they get lighter as they go into the background. And once again, we've tricked the eye on a 2D surface to believe we're seeing depth via value. And also overlaps, as that queen overlaps the arch, looking out onto the planet there. We believe that she's in front of that arch by the very fact that she overlaps it and blocks the bottom part of it. So we've tricked the eye again into believing that there's 2 different depths here. The depth from our eye view on the queen and behind her, and then a further depth outside of the arch to see that moon of Mars. We believe through the value choices and the overlaps that there's depth. That's, once again, another incredible, wonderful thing. What about ornaments on the queen's helmet here? Queens always wore headdresses. It showed nobility right through to the Egyptian times and beyond. Drawn on previous cultures and pageantry. We still have pageantry today, but there's very little of it compared to the olden days, back to the Egyptian times. And there's queens of Egypt and Greece and all queens everywhere, and they were almost godlike. This idea of a royal warrior princess becoming a queen is just, for me, astonishing, and it's imaginative sculpt rather than just a queen that sits and deals out laws. I want to have that fantasy element back, and that's what I'm working on here. Now, I often tell my students, if you're taking more than 10 or 15 minutes on a concept, you're taking too long. I'm actually taking too long here, but what I'm doing in my mind, because I've already got this concept so wedded from the backstory, is that I am seeking out more story as I draw this. I'm thinking about this queen and her demeanor What is it she wants is a question I always ask. What does she want? And I'm readdressing that as I draw even just that neck muscle in there, the sternocleidomastoid. I'm saying to myself, she's looking upwards. She's proud. Of course she is. She's a queen. But what if we give her more humanity and say she's proud, but she's lonely? What is it she wants? Not to be lonely. Or let's say she's a mean person and she's not lonely, and she just wants more power, and she's thinking about, how can I usurp that other kingdom? How can I send my armies out there? I'm trying to put thoughts in her mind so that I can understand this imaginary creature that's now becoming, in my mind, a real person. And if we can get that, mindset, and it doesn't take long to really envelop yourself into the character, then you'll paint as if you know that character and as if it's a real character rather than a picture of a posed model. I will pose a model for this, so I want to get that whole demeanor and idea right before the model comes in. I've cherry-picked my models down to just 2 or 3 that really understand my mind as well, and they're artists too. And so I'll bring Katie in for this. I'll tell her the emotion, because I'm working it out right now, and I'll explain to her what we need. Katie is this queen, and here's what she has happening for her. She's searching for love, let's say. Let's nail something in. She's searching for love. It's lonely being queen. You're the only one of your kind. And she needs companion. She needs a warrior companion. She can't just have an ordinary guy that's just not interested in anything other than having a big meal every night and enjoying the luxury of wealth. She wants a warrior to be her king. So that's going to be hard to find because warriors are usually barbaric. So she's got a task ahead of her. And so I want to have Katie in to say, Katie, here's the deal. It's a warrior queen. She wants a warrior king. She's lonely, but she's noble. She's regal. She's majestic. She's hiding inside a pain, which is the pain of loneliness. And that's what I am doing as I draw. I'm always thinking. I'm thinking also now at this point here of the possible finish at the end. What will we have at the end of this to really make it magical? And I'm thinking of maybe Martian flies that glow in the background. We could have birds that also gives us a secondary theme of freedom. I was discussing these very themes in class the other day with my students, showing them how much the backstory and the emotional depth makes your art rise way above the average. And with all that in mind now, after all of that value search, shape searching, it's very easy now for me to go, this is it. I have what I need. I have the pose. I have the motivation for the queen. I know what the character's like. I have all of this working now. Let's put some color in. Digitally, that's very easy to do. I'll just work with 3 layers, one in multiply for darker colors, one in overlay for brighter colors, and one in light mode to get highlights. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm just switching back and forth to those modes with a big brush and keeping it, once again, bold. See, I'm not worried about going over the top of the figure, for instance. So for me, this is now, after all of our wonderful deliberations, sitting back and imagining this world and enjoying every moment of that imaginary journey in our own minds. These are thought experiments as we go through. Now I'm thinking about the color choices. We have Mars. We already know now we've got drones up there. We know what the surface of Mars looks like. It's not very impressive, to be honest. On the complete surface, looking from the exploratory robots that we have up there. But from the satellite views, the terrain is incredible. So I have my mind open to a massive background there. And it's made me think also, while I'm doing this, that maybe I should take this outdoors. I'm painting this during lockdown as well. And the thought of me being indoors, painting an indoor scene, actually feels a little bit constricted for me. And I'm going off the idea. But I'm not off the idea of the pose. None of this is lost. This is all still color choices and value choices that are very important. So there's never any failure in art. We need to explore. All of the explorations that you throw away are part and parcel of the final art. I'm changing the value modes here via overlay, copying the layers and changing the overlay and moving the sliders back and forth. That's what you're seeing here, to see what kind of depth I can get inside of these ideas. Now that I've established that she's searching and she's lonely, even though she's the queen, I want to cast a little bit of doubt upon whether or not she will find this love. And I can't have her hold up a sign and say, I'm not sure if I'll find this love, and I probably never will. But I can imply it with foreboding ideas. And there's nothing more foreboding than a storm cloud, for instance. And it casts a shadow. And you'll often hear it, he cast a shadow over the whole thing, meaning made everything bad. And so I'm going to cast a shadow over the queen's face and have the highlight not where we normally see it on the face, but in the gesture of her body, the languid nature of her body. And that will, even though it doesn't say it in words, will emotionally tell us that the center of this idea, this normally what we look at, this face, is not in light. And emotionally we'll feel that there's something wrong about that. That's odd. And it's used time and again in horror movies. You know, people come out of the shadows. But here I want to use a softer shadow to imply that it's a lost love idea. Most of my students will say to me, it's color I can't understand. But if we break it down into the very simplest idea, once again, of big to small, we're basically working with warms and cools. And so if we just think of warms and cools, we can make an easier choice of this. So I'm putting the cools in the shadows, I'm putting the warms on the highlights, and seeing what we can work out from there as far as what is the proportion of those different colors. Now, the great thing about the digital platform, once I weeded out or went through the weeds, I ended up with these concepts. So I did one after the other, and basically you can see in the top right there what we started with. And then I started to just duplicate that layer and paint on top over and over until I got what I wanted. Alright, so that's the concept idea of where we're going here with this. And what I'll do from this point now is go hire a model and work on a big sketch, maybe a preliminary life draw before that of the model before the sketch, and then detail that sketch down, put it on canvas, and on the final workshop we'll work on the actual painting itself. So the next workshop is all about finding compositional elements, looking at reference of clothes and jewelry and all kinds of things to make this queen work. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next workshop. Best of luck with your own efforts.